All right. So from your guys' groups, what shapes or influences your thinking and seeing the world? If any of you want to jump at it.
Three things my group talked about for the first question
Yeah.
was how you grew up, like your family situation,
Yeah.
uh, your economic situation, and past trauma.
Yeah, that's too real. Yeah, and especially that last one. What do you think trauma? What kind of influence does trauma have?
Um, I think it depends, one, on the trauma, and two, on what you take out of it.
Hmm.
Uh, because I mean, either it could make you pretty cynical,
Yeah.
or it might make you more empathetic. Like, it really just depends on the person, the situation, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting. Interesting. Absolutely. So, what role does culture play then in your thinking and seeing the world? And obviously, this is going to be very contextual because not all of us share the exact same culture. We all take, as Megan brought up, we take these little bits and pieces from different things. But Megan, what do you guys answer for that one?
We talked about how when you're growing up in a culture, you don't really have a choice in it.
Hmm.
Um, but about how when um, you're able to kind of break out of that, so maybe there's sometimes toxic elements to it, how learning to get out of that, or embracing different parts of your culture, can all really go towards shaping the person you are and
Yeah,
what role you play in the world.
definitely. Definitely. And especially depending on, Megan, you brought up something really good, especially depending on the trauma that you experience. If you're experiencing sexual abuse in a context where we just don't talk about that, especially if it was done by a family member that was a beloved family member, then it just that kind of stuff gets suppressed and then ends up very much shaping how you believe the world works and how it operates. And yeah, it's just it shapes us in very radical ways in order for us to kind of help understand. And so both the ways in which we think and then how we go about processing the world as well. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. Nice. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Yeah, one of the things we talked about in my group that like
Uh-huh.
shaped our thinking um, is like what church you grew up in, or if you didn't grow up in one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially like for me, I grew up in a hyper authoritarian and legalistic church, so
Yeah.
that's shaped a lot of how I think and see the world.
How so? How's it shaped the way you think?
Well, especially with hyper authoritarianism, I never growing up questioned authority, and I had like great respect for them because like they were almost seen as like second to God.
Yeah.
In my church, it was not good. And we left when I was around 14 or 6, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Um, but like it got to the point where if you ever questioned an authority or tried to like say, well, I kind of disagree with that, they would like punish you or kick you out of the church. It was bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are difficult places to be in, especially because you start almost establishing a kind of culture of fear. And that provides a lot of the motivation for people to either do or not do certain things, which can be, man, that's suffocating. It gets to be really suffocating. So, what role does culture play, both your own and popular culture at large, play in your thinking?
Wait, me?
Yeah, yeah. We guys talked in your group.
Um, well, my partner was Brianna.
Mm-hmm.
She said that she grew up in a Mexican home, so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like her daily life and the way she interacted with her family was largely influenced by that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I grew up kind of in my church bubble, so that was my culture,
Mm.
especially like with my family, immediate family at least. Uh, like we all live exactly the same,
Yeah.
almost. That makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nicole. Appreciate it. Nice. All right, one more person. One more person. What do you guys talk about in your group?
I guess I can share a little
Go
bit
ahead,
what
Scout.
in our group. We kind of talked about how households in our
Mhm.
group, how like you could, say you live in a split family, or even in your household, it's a split family. Like, and there's someone who wants to go to church and someone who doesn't, or you go from one parent to the other, and your household is incredibly strict and like rigorous and stuff like that, or the other one is in which like it's a little bit more chill, laid back, but both require church from you. You just like one experience more than the next.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense. And so, what role does culture play in that, and the differences?
Just that, like, it's kind of just your behavior is a product of that.
Mm.
So where you grew up, who you grew up with, it takes a village to build a person, right? So
Mhm.
and your five most influential people in your life have kind of created you into who you are right now. And I think that's definitely what it was. Your culture is the people you hang around with, the people you look up to. So
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you guys for your guys' responses. I'm sure, and I hope you guys had really good interactive time. Part of it, one, that we need to talk about culture more in our own cultures that we come from. Whether we think that we had no culture or we had tons of culture around us, we all have a culture that we come from that usually when we think it's just food, it's just music, it's dancing, it's art, but it's also the shared values and assumptions that we have about what does it mean to be a participant in a certain group, and how those values shape the way we see the world, because the world of the Bible is likewise not without this same kind of thinking. And so today when we're talking about the contours of Hebrew thought, getting inside the kind of minds of these early Hebrews that are writing these texts, that are putting these texts together, that are living through these experiences, to recognize the differences between us and them, that we rightly might be able to understand what it is that they're communicating to us in their own ways, and what do we have to learn from them that might enrich in both our spiritual lives and make us more faithful followers of Jesus. Yes, even from the Old Testament. And so there are some differences that I want us to note, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. These aren't going to show up on a quiz, so don't worry. But this is going to be things that we recognize, and then we'll apply a couple of these things here. That truth as experienced, it's lived out and embodied. That truth that isn't lived isn't actually real. That there is no thought that truth is just an abstract idea that's out there. 2 + 2 = 4 is just an idea. So there's no number theory necessarily. They have numbers, but not necessarily this kind of abstract theory that everything was concrete. Everything is concrete, embodied, experienced. And then again, we'll talk about this with Psalm 1 again. That the essence of godliness is tied directly to a relationship, not to a creed. Again, this more has to do with Israel's specific relationship to Yahweh in the Old Testament, and it'll come up again with Jesus in the New Testament. But again, that godliness, being more like God's character, embodying more of God's character, is directly tied to relationship, not just an abstract knowing a set of facts. It's not just enough to know the 10 Commandments or the 10 words, but rather to live in relationship with Yahweh through these commandments of how to be God's people in relationship with Yahweh and with other people. And again, that's why I say that Torah is closer to being teaching more so than law, though it is a set of legal texts. But it's better understood for us as a way of trying to encourage God's people, at least early Israel, encourage God's people to be his people in relationship with himself. And this is how you sustain that relationship. And so again, it's tied more so to trying to the pursuit of relationship more so than trying to have people follow a set of rules. And that the earliest theology is relational and existential rather than propositional or creedal. So this really ties in these two. And what I mean by that, again, that theology happens in relationship. That the way that early Hebrews understand the relationship with God is by what God has done. It's revelation that gives way through experience. And so again, instead of putting forth these abstract ideas that God is good, God is just, God is kind, it's no, that God has delivered us from delivered us from Pharaoh and the Egyptians. God is compassionate. God saw our plight in slavery, therefore God is kind. Like there's this experience that they have with Yahweh that then allows them to elaborate on their theology. That they have this experience encounter with God, and that creates their theology. And so that's what I mean, that it happens through relationship, not just through proposition or these throwing out these random ideas. And so there's a couple of different there's two other differences, that is visceral, deep feeling. That again, the Hebrew Bible is not devoid of visceral, emotional language. You have, and I'll go through it when I get there. In Exodus, that you have Yahweh getting angry at Israel once, at Moses, and then again at Israel. But that literally, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I know I have on some occasions where when you get so, excuse the French, when you get so pissed off that your face gets red and you just feel so freaking hot, but you especially feel it in here. That's exactly what the Hebrew is saying, that Yahweh's nose grew hot with Moses or with Israel. The Yahweh's face got hot. But again, the way we have to interpret that is that Yahweh got angry. Yahweh was upset. And so these kind of deep feelings, this deep visceral language that is both expressed as a part of God's character, but then also for God's people as well, and especially in the Psalms, that you have groaning and weeping, that you have being soaking your pillow with tears, um, that being in relationship with Yahweh, it's not just a kind of cognitive thing, that you have positive thinking and that kind of what sustains your life with God, but rather that they are emotions that are encapsulated within the life of faith. And especially for us, I know we're getting more inclusive of those kinds of things. But I remember I went out because I'm an alumni of LPU too, or Life Pacific College back in the day, where emotions weren't a thing to be trusted, and especially, excuse me, being a Pentecostal. Like, no, you don't. It's faith over feelings, and I get the thought of that, but there's no reason to pit one against the other. That we understand what does it mean to be loyal or faithful to Yahweh through not just through emotions, but through the gathering of all of ourselves before God, including our emotional selves. Because not even the Bible is devoid of feeling language, where you have God whose heart, and we'll read this in Genesis 6, where literally God's heart is broken. It says he's deeply grieved, but again, in Hebrew, it's God has his heart broken by humanity. But the ways in which God experiences these kinds of things, and likewise God's people experience these things, it's again deep and visceral. It involves the body, the emotions. And that likewise Hebrew express emotions from across the spectrum: anger, sadness, pain, joy, etc. And so a lot of the ways this is expressed is one through block logic, and then the use of poetry, word pictures, and meditation. You'll find this a lot. You will find a lot of poetry in the Old Testament, and we'll talk about why that is. And so block logic, that these are units or concepts expressed in self-contained units. It says unis, but it should say units with a T, or blocks of thought. And incorrectly spelled words is like my pet peeve, and so I'm going to drive myself crazy looking at that one word. So there you go. Yeah, I'm like OCD with spelling. So concept expressed in self-contained units or blocks of thought. And so they don't necessarily fit in a clean cut pattern. And what you'll find in the Old Testament, where it kind of makes these jumps, and again, as you're reading through Genesis, it seems like these two creation stories that are happening within the first couple of chapters are unrelated. They're two different stories, but there are certain things going on when we take a look at some of the elements that are going on there and get behind the scenes to see how these two texts are related, even though at the front end, they seem to be two different texts. And so likewise, there will be gaps in the story. And I talk about this in Biblit, but there's just certain details that author just doesn't include for whatever reason. We don't know where Cain and Abel's wives came from. They just showed up. We don't have a ton of details on the Nephilim. Like we can assume some things, We could put some things together, but again, there's certain things that come up in the story that can't be easily explained, and they seem to jump from point to point to point, and especially in the narrative. And I'll talk about it when we get there again. Um, that the authors are very much focused on the development of Israel's story through specific characters. And we'll go through those characters in class. We went through them generally in Biblit, and you guys went through them generally in Biblit, but we'll go through them a little more specifically in this class. And then you have polarity of thought or dialectic, and there's a discussion. The dialogue often characterize block thought. And again, you'll have this in discussions between characters. And so you're going to want to take note that what are the characters saying and how is that elaborating both on their worldview, on their point of view, as well as bringing up something and a kind of tension in the text that comes up again and again and again and again. And I had done this broadly in Biblit, and likewise, Professor Ortega, Professor Merriman should have brought this up as well. To pay attention to the speech, especially between characters, because that's where a lot of the tensions will come up in the text. And so again, we did that broadly in Biblit, but we're going to do it in more specifics here in class. But again, the speech of the individuals will let us know what's at stake in the story, what's most valued, what's most important to the individuals, and how is this pushing the story forward. And then the experience of truth. The deed is more important than the creed. Not to say that the creed is not important, but the deed, the act, the follow through is more important than just the confession. It's both in line with one another, but weighted that the act itself is weighed heavier than the confession itself. And so I know this might seem a little weird because I'm pulling it from the New Testament, but it's just the most obvious and quick example. If you guys have read through James, this thing reads so wildly because he bounces around. It's kind of like talking to your old uncle or your grandpa, where they just go from story to story to story to story. And then this one time, it's like, dude, like where in the world are you going? Like, it's just so random. I find myself doing that more often, which is, I don't know if it's just the prevalence of my 33 years on this planet, or if it's I don't know what's going on, but you'll see within James's letter, and we'll read through some of it, he goes from topic to topic to topic. He goes suffering, perseverance, wisdom, asking God, doubt, reordering positions, and then God's treatment of those within and without power. Again, he'll bounce around from topic to topic. He's not interested in sustaining this argument the way Paul does, but rather he's going to go again. We'll read it through right now and you'll see. Does anybody want to read this for us in class? Go ahead, Nicole.
My brothers and sisters, wherever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you is lacking wisdom, ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to you. But ask in faith, never doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. It is the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Nicole. But you guys see what I'm talking about? How you can see some of the strings there at the end where he starts to kind of knit them together. But again, you have this thing from topic to topic to topic. He doesn't go about elaborating, stating his thesis, providing 3 references, providing all this background information for why this is the case and trying to make his point. No. Count it all joy when you experience suffering, because suffering produces perseverance, and let perseverance have its way. If you lack wisdom, ask for wisdom, but you better not doubt, because if you doubt, then you're going to be tossed to and fro. And so those who are rich, who are poor, boast about their position with God, and then likewise with the rich, do the opposite. And so again, this kind of going back and forth, that if we understand what is going on, because again, James is he comes from a Jewish context, working with the kinds of things that he's working with, more specifically, again with Hebrew culture and with Hebrew tools. That's what he's utilizing. Again, that the reason why I had put that little bit on the rich and the poor is because again, that this kind of application, that the deed is more important than the creed, that he's not just leaving these ideas out there to kind of just be thought about, but rather to be acted upon in real life as they are experiencing both suffering, praying for wisdom, and then actively going about their day-to-day lives as again within their economic positions. And so again, that James is very much embedded in this kind of thinking, that truth is lived out, that there is an involvement of the total individual, and that what matters is this kind of movement towards action, which James, notorious for faith without works is dead. And so the role of word pictures, poetry, meditation. And so word pictures, they help capture these entire images within the story, that they do more than just literally saying what somebody is trying to say, that to say that somebody is deeply invested and interested in God, but rather saying that they're like a tree who's planted by water, who will bear their fruit in due season. And so again, these images that help to capture more depth than just what is being, than again, just a statement of fact. It's a rather artistic expression of what can be captured literally, but again, it's the artist's intent to be able to elaborate more, to invite us into what does this picture mean? What is the intention behind what this author is trying to say, and trying to help us to understand both about ourselves and about God and the world that we live in. So it enhances also the narratives, which comprises a lot of the Pentateuch. You have truth which is embedded in the story and not just given directly. And you find this a ton with Jesus. A ton with Jesus, which is why he tells a lot of parables. That he doesn't just say, hey, I'm the savior of the world, even though he does say that at some points. But with this telling of parables and what he's trying to teach through them, that the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. That the kingdom of God is like a man who sold everything he had and went and bought a field looking for this pearl. And that what is God like? Well, God is like a person who's lost a coin and then cleans up their whole house to try to find this one coin. That God is like this father whose son who's run off. And then when he comes back, he welcomes him back in. And so again, that to try to give us these, not just both word pictures and parables work in the same kinds of ways, that the truth is embedded within the story. It's not just given blatantly. Hey, follow Yahweh. No, instead we're giving a freaking messy story in the book of Judges about what happens when we are left to our own devices and thinking that if we just each one for themselves, we'll be all right. Circular. And so again, to recognize that the truth is embedded within the story, so we're rightly invited to think about, to contemplate, to chew on this story, to think about and to meditate on what it is that God is trying to tell us in and through this story. And again, when I say story, I don't mean that it's fake and that parts are made up, but rather that's what we have. These are the components of what we're being given. And so poetry. The poetry helps to enhance memory. And mind you, these are people for a long time, and even probably still to some extent. It's a verbal culture, that a lot of memorization, that there's a lot of rote memorization that you repeat and you recite over again and again and again and again. And so you remember these stories. It's a lot. Again, I grew up with my grandparents. And any of you, again, that likewise grew up with your grandparents, you'll have heard the same story 20,000 times over again and again and again, to the point where you can now recite that story yourself on the spot. And it's a lot of the same thing that's happening again with Hebrew story and culture, that is it's written in poetry to help us memorize, which is why so much when we're kids, literally everything's a poem or a song. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then everybody else in the class is starting to sing H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And again, that if you're wanting to memorize anything, if you turn it into a song, give yourself 5 minutes. And that's why when somebody drops, when you're at a wedding, when you're at a birthday party, all you need to hear is, this is how we do it. And then boom, everybody knows what song it is. And that's just a shout out to everybody who's probably over like 28. But I don't know what song, I don't know what other song drops that everybody's going crazy for. But again, it's just, it song does so much for us to help us. Somebody song does so much for us to be able to enhance our memories, that it lodges itself in our brains. And yeah, neurologically what it does do, again, that song is still it gets me every time, that it involves both sides of the brain. So when you're reciting these kinds of things, that um especially when you're in church on your own, that it's reminding both yourself and helping get lodged within your bones, your body, the story of what it is God is doing, and more so about who God is. Because again, truth is embedded within the story and is also meant to be lived out. And if we don't have the story of who God is and what he's done and what he's doing, then we miss out on so much of the ways in which God is shaping us to be his people, which again is the point of why the Pentateuch is put together. And so the role of word pictures, poetry, and meditation, and that meditation holds all of it together. That it's not just home, sitting there just making up home, trying to clear your mind and not think about anything home. No, it's that the practice of remembering. In Hebrew, it's called chagah, and it's the picture is it's taken from what a cow would do, because cows have multiple stomachs, and what a cow would do is chew the grass, and would come up as cud, and then it would be brought, spit up, taken back down, spit up, taken back down, spit up, taken back down. And that's the thought of meditation. What we're doing is we're chewing, we're going over it again and again, the repetition again, in order to rightly be able to be shaped as God's people, to live faithfully within the world, to know these stories both as warnings and encouragement towards faithfulness. And so before we ask questions and then break off into groups again, that seeing the world theologically and all the difference it makes, that all of life is seen as God's domain, that there's an awareness that in everything we do, that God is up to something, that there's nothing that is without God's involvement, which invites prayer throughout the day, that there's a kind of pervasiveness, that you pray before you eat, you pray before you work, you pray before you wash your hands, you pray before you go to there's prayers to go to the bathroom. If you look up Jewish prayers before, I've like, I don't want to say exporting excrement, but like prayers before, there's literally prayers for everything. When a baby's born, there's a prayer. When you're having intimate relations with your significant other, there's a prayer for that as well. Like, it's just everywhere. There's nowhere that God is not invited into, including in the bedroom between married individuals. Like, there's nothing that is out of God's realm. And there's a kind of beauty to that, to see how God is intimately involved in our lives. And so there's also faith as a journey rather than a set of rules to be observed. And I can't emphasize this enough, that especially for some of us that are coming from toxic places, rethinking some of the theology, rethinking some of the stories we've heard growing up, that it's a journey. It's not just about assuming a whole new set of rules right after you've freed yourself from some other ones, but really becoming a more faithful follower of Jesus and becoming sensitive to the Spirit. And as we talked about before, that because culture is so contextual, that the things we pick up now and our involvement within different communities, wherever God takes you, that to be able to learn how are we to be flexible people while staying faithful, being responsive to culture and being responsive to people while being faithful. In order for that to happen, we got to learn. And thank God that all of life is within God's domain, that we might be able to learn in every facet of life what does it mean to be faithful. And so, just real quick, before we do this exercise, are there any questions so far? Any questions? I know there's a lot of information being tossed your way. Some of it may be new. Maybe all of it's new. Any questions? Any thoughts? Is there any of this that makes sense, or is it just kind of weird?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's also interesting to see
Oh.
how our current culture right now is on the shift, because I feel like there's certain things in the way that, like, just like digging into like all of, I don't know, I'm like really into education, like child education, and so like just the way that we like teach and the way that like our culture thinks that we should teach is shifting.
Yeah.
And so, like, even like this, like how the Bible's written is a little more like what they want things to, like what people are saying they want things to be like more like poetry, more music, more emotions involved. Like that's like, it's kind of like, oh yeah, those are good things. So it's interesting that they're already like that, like while going back and like digging into scripture, that this is a culture that was doing things that our culture is now realizing are more important than what we gave them credit for.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's just interesting what seems to be, there's a phrase that's getting more and more prominent, and it's not because you said it, medicine. I was gonna already say it, but the phrase "I feel that," and then you say what you want to say. Whereas before we might say more of, well, I think this, well, my opinion is this. And again, I don't want to necessarily pull the two apart, but usually when we say I think this, we're thinking cognitive. I feel kind of to come from somewhere a little more earthy, a little more soulful. I just feel like, and then you say what you're thinking, feeling, sensing. So even the shift away from that of I think, boom, and then you'll say what you say. But and again, it's not wrong, it's not better or worse. It's just the change in our vocabulary alerts us to the kind of changes that Maddie that you're referring to, which I think is a necessary shift in the way that we both understand and communicate with one another, to understand that we're not just walking brains. And especially in church where it's like, leave your emotions at the door, leave your problems at the door, and let's feed you information for the next half hour in the form of a sermon and hope that things get better. No, but instead inviting whole people to participate in these kinds of things where if life sucks, let me freaking mourn. If life's going great, let me celebrate. If life's just chill, let me chill. Like let me take it easy. But unless we're afforded these kinds of spaces, instead of just being assumed that we're all just a bunch of brains walking around, that if we just had a little more information, then we'll be all right. Nah, sometimes we need a good cry. Sometimes we need to laugh. Sometimes we need to be pissed off. Sometimes we just need to sit, think, and breathe. And so thank you for bringing that up, Maddie. It's really good. And I think it's definitely a necessary shift that we've been needing to make for some time. It's just good to finally have gotten around to it. All right, so what we're gonna do up next to kind of help us process some of this, a short exercise. So what I want you guys to do, read through Psalm 1. Take note of what is in the Psalm that draws on Hebrew thought. So again, pull up the PowerPoint, just because there's so many things there. Truth as experience, lived out, visceral emotional language, block logic, or the use of poetry, word pictures, and meditation. And Psalm 1, it's going to be so obvious, you're going to see it right from the jump. So don't freak out and think this is some kind of crazy quiz. But read through the psalm, take note of what in the psalm draws on Hebrew thought, and then pick a person to explain your finding. We won't go through all the groups just for the sake of time, but just bear in mind that I'm just going to call on people and it might be you. So, all right, we'll go ahead and go back into groups. I'm going to open up these rooms and then I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to work on it. Again, it won't take very long once you have the psalm open. You guys will be able to get it like this. It's a short psalm too. All right, do you guys still need the PowerPoint up, or you guys know the questions we're talking about? We good? All right, sweet. All right. First, does anybody want to share? Anybody share what they found in the psalm? Go ahead, Greg.
So there were a few things that I found as far as like word pictures. Like in verse 3, he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. And Marissa, looks like you guys found the same thing. Yeah. And what, Marissa, if you want to answer this one, what might that be trying to express by way of this word picture?
Well, it's talking about the people that are blessed, that are living in the way of the Lord, and by a tree being planted close to water, it has the nutrients and what it needs to be able to produce a lot of fruit. So it's like saying if we stay close to God, like the tree is close to water, then we'll produce fruit and blessing in our own life from God.
Good, good. Exactly. But instead of just saying if you do A, then B will happen, you get this image of this tree that's by water. Good, 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 good. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else?
It's arguable, but so for block logic,
Yeah.
I was kind of seeing the 6 verses broken up into chunks. At first I was like 1, 2 as a chunk, 3 as itself, 4, 5 as a chunk, and then 6. But then on review, I was like, no, really 1 through 3 are a chunk, and then 4, 5, and then 6, because it's like righteousness, evil, and then like overview, righteous and evil, and like the Lord. And so I felt like it was broken up into those chunks.
Good. Good. Yeah, like you said, of course, we don't necessarily have time to fully get into it, but to see how it goes from one thing to the next thing, like the topics just kind of bounce around. That's seemingly unrelated if you were to pull them apart. But if we were to do a little bit more investigation, then maybe we'd be able to find a tie through the two. Good. Good. All right. One more person. One more person. Not everybody at once.
Okay, so the psalm talks a lot about how the righteous person is living in the law or in the truth. But it's not just like they're able to recite it backwards and forwards. They really like experience it, and because they live in it and by it, they are able to grow and yield fruit.
Exactly. Exactly. And that specific mention of meditating on it day and night, like to see these kinds of phrases, and it's not just like, and you'll know we have a phrase ourselves that you end up using to translate 24/7, just all the time, just going over it again and again and again and again. Like it doesn't matter what time of day or night, 24/7, 365, like just every day this person was blessed is just going through Torah, going through Yahweh's teaching all over again and again and again. And again, that through this working, you're like a river, like a tree that's planted by water. And so this act, this meditating, this chewing on, spending time in, going over it again and again and again, that's what we'll get to do this semester, is be able to chew on some of this and to be able to take our time working through it. And that's what I want to encourage you guys, that with the readings are broken up a little bit, and to not rush through it, especially the Bible stuff. I understand with some of the articles they can be a little dense, but with the Bible stuff, do give it a little bit more time to kind of take your time with working through it. And so, all right. Well, you guys have an excellent Thursday. If you guys have any questions, I'll be here for a few minutes. If not, you guys have an awesome Thursday. I have my office hours today from 2 to 4. If you have any other questions that you'd want to ask, but other than that, see you guys.